Hello, and welcome to this Civil War presentation. The United States Civil War took place from 1861 until 1865, and contrary to contemporary politics, this was the most divisive time in America's history. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States of America, the first candidate from the Republican Party. In the election of 1860, there were 4 candidates who earned Electoral College votes. Abraham Lincoln for the Republican Party, John Bell of the Constitutional Union, which earned Electoral College votes in the border states, Stephen Douglas, the Northern Democratic candidate who earned Electoral College votes for Missouri, and John Breckinridge, the Southern Democrat. Abraham Lincoln did not appear on many of the ballots in the South. Even prior to Abraham Lincoln's election on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina is the first state to start the secession process, followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. They all secede before Abraham Lincoln is inaugurated. And Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederate States of America, said, "The CSA's foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and moral condition." So you can see a primary source reference for why the South felt they needed to secede to protect their institution of slavery. Now, the Confederate States of America is formally formed in February 9th, 1861, with Jefferson Davis elected president becoming president of the Confederate States of America. He had been a former senator from Mississippi and was Secretary of War under Franklin Pierce, who helped to negotiate the Gadsden Purchase for the southern borders of Arizona and New Mexico in hope of a southern transcontinental railroad. Now, the official Civil War began when Fort Sumter in South Carolina was under attack, which began on April 12, 1861, in South Carolina. Now, Abraham Lincoln had viewed these southern states as states in rebellion. He never recognized their sovereignty as an independent nation. As such, he wanted to protect federal military installations, including Fort Sumter. And that is when the South started to attack Fort Sumter, led by General P.G.T. Beauregard. The Confederate batteries started to attack the fort. And within 34 hours, Fort Sumter surrenders, and the Civil War is well underway, leading to, you can call it, a Confederate victory. The next battle, really the first two to really kick it off in 1861, was in July 21st, 1861. In the North, they call it the First Battle of Bull Run. Took place in Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. In the South, this is called the First Battle of Manassas, as the battle took place at Manassas Junction, about 25 miles from D.C. Now, many people in the early stages of the Civil War came out to take like a sporting event, to watch the battle take place. Little did they know that they would be overrun and have to scurry away as the battle raged on. The First Battle of Bull Run resulted in a Confederate victory. So initially on, the South has 2 big victories to start off. Now, the North, once the war is underway, creates what they call the Anaconda Plan, led by General Winfield Scott. General Winfield Scott, who became known, was a general during the Mexican-American War, and is the commander for the Union at the start of the war. Now, the plan was threefold. First, the Union Navy would block southern ports like Charleston, Mobile, and so that they could no longer export cotton nor get in the imported manufactured goods they needed to survive. 2. Riverboats and armies would go up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries to split the Confederacy in two. And 3rd, the Union armies would capture the Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia. So throughout these next battles, I want you to see how the Union and their generals and armies are working to successfully accomplish the Anaconda Plan. Continuing with the battles in the South, Battle of Fort Henry, February 6, 1862, in Tennessee, took place near the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River. Ulysses S. Grant, this is his first real battle during the United States Civil War, leading the North. The loss of Fort Henry and Fort Donelson were serious setbacks for the Confederacy after those early victories. Ironclad ships from the North defeated Confederate resistance from the shores and at Fort Henry. So the North wins this, and then battles of Fort Henry and Fort Donelson are typically connected together as they happen within days of each other in February 1862, with Fort Henry being more of a battle fought on the water, whereas Fort Donelson was fought on land. No terms except for an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted, and this is said by General Ulysses S. Grant, and it kind of makes him stand out in Abraham Lincoln's eyes, leading up throughout the early phases of this war, and then you'll come to find throughout this presentation that Ulysses S. Grant will be Abraham Lincoln's man to finish the Civil War. So again, it is a Union victory. And here you can see the locations of both Fort Henry and Fort Donelson near the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River in Tennessee. The Battle of Hampton Roads. This is one of the more glorious battles of the war. Glorious in terms of its uniqueness. Now, it took place in Virginia in March 1862, and really this is the first battle between two ironclad ships, the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. Now, the Virginia was originally a Union Navy ship, but as the Confederate States are getting going, they salvaged the Merrimac, and then converted it into the Confederate States vessel Virginia. So sometimes you'll see this called the Battle of the Monitor and Merrimac. First battle between steam-powered ironclad ships. So you have the technology, product of the technology revolution with the steam-powered engine, and then ironclad ships like banging into each other throughout the water in outside of Virginia. It's essentially a stalemate, so it's indecisive. However, it marked an epic turning point in technology in naval warfare. Now, the Battle of Glorieta Pass. This battle took place in March 1862 and really is nothing super spicy or sexy. It happened in New Mexico, so it is outside the North and South, whereas most battles are fought, like Gettysburg in Pennsylvania or battles in Virginia or Tennessee. However, this is a Western battle. Now, the reason why I mention it, though, is because of its significance as the Gettysburg of the West, but then also the significance of Union Colonel John Chivington, who was a Methodist pastor who gained experience with the ruthlessness as he stopped a Confederate supply train and gold miners from Colorado. Now, that ruthlessness he will then bring with him throughout the Indian Wars, and Colonel Chivington is known most notably during the Indian Wars and the massacre at Sand Creek in Colorado. Now, this Union victory, while relatively insignificant in the broad scheme of things, had the South gained access to gold throughout California or the gold mines in Colorado, what is now Colorado. That could have been a turning point, as the Confederates could have had access to significant gold or currency to help fund the war. But remember Chivington. Now, the Battle of Shiloh. The Battle of Shiloh personally is significant for me because I had the opportunity when we played in the 2007 National Championship game in Tennessee to get to go to the battlefield as part of the experience for the National Championship. Now, the Battle of Shiloh took place in April 1862 in Tennessee. And there's a couple images. There's the Hornet's Nest. Now, they call it the Hornet's Nest because the trees are so tightly packed, and as the bullets were whizzing through the trees, it sounded like a herd of hornets. It was, in some places, you'll hear this called the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, which is a spot on the Tennessee River. And then there's a church nearby named the Shiloh Church, and that's where the battle gets its name. By far the bloodiest battle up to this point, leaving 20,000 men wounded or dead. Now, the Confederates come close to a significant victory on the first day, but instead suffer a crushing defeat as they do not pursue victory on April 6th, leaving April 7th, the opportunity for the Union to come back in. So now this is where I would normally, if we were in person, share some pictures and personal stories about the Battle of Shiloh. It was a really cool experience. Here's some pictures that I took on our trip. The thing that I remember most significantly is all the images or all the headstones at the National Cemetery there, because and a lot of these are just unknown soldiers. So 2/3 are unknowns, meaning the human sacrifice when you have 20,000 casualties over 2 days, and yet 2/3 of them are unknown. The kind of in the Civil War, the loss of human life becoming less and less valuable was rather alarming as I experienced this there. The other thing about the Battle of Shiloh is John Wesley Powell loses his arm as he's signaling for cannons to be shot. As he's raising his arm is wounded, and he has to lose his arm. Now, John Wesley Powell is significant because he's going to lead an expedition down the Colorado River and essentially discover the Grand Canyon. Now, what's significant about that is John Wesley Powell's expedition started on Expedition Island in Green River, Wyoming. So all my life there was a statue of John Wesley Powell outside the museum in Green River, Wyoming, and all this time I just thought somebody had broke his arm. And then in 2007 we're in Tennessee, and I'm hearing the story, and I'm like, oh, that's exactly why his arm is only half there. He lost it during the Battle of Shiloh. There's a lot of other significant things that I took away from this. A general was shot in the femoral artery, and he doesn't know it, and so he bleeds out. He just keeps fighting, and then all of a sudden he realizes that he's been shot in the leg, and bleeds out and dies. But he just kept fighting, and I just think that some of these stories of personal sacrifice and heroism are quite remarkable. Continuing on. Now, the capture of New Orleans, trying to progress the Anaconda Plan. In April 1862 in Louisiana, the North works to, under Admiral David Farragut, works to capture New Orleans. It's a significant defeat for the Confederates. During a naval operation, Admiral David Farragut is able to get past the Confederate forts and capture New Orleans, and then when you capture New Orleans, then you control the mouth of the mighty Mississippi. So this is a significant victory, and this is not the last time you will hear of Admiral David Farragut during the United States Civil War. The 7 Days Battles took place between June and July 1862 in Virginia. Most of these battles are going to take place in Virginia. And Robert E. Lee, who is the commander of the Confederacy, led the Army of Virginia in a 7-day battle offensive of the Potomac back from Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. So he's leading them. He's protecting the capital of Richmond, which again, part of the Anaconda Plan. They're not going to capture this at Richmond until the North is not going to capture Richmond until 1865. However, there's an attempt that he blocks in trying to capture Richmond. Although costly, clumsily executed, constituted a major strategic victory for the Confederacy because it does protect Richmond. But the other thing of why it's so significant is this haunting image. And this is really the main reason why I include this in this presentation. This is the picture of Private Edwin Francis Jemison. And he was killed during the 7 Days Battle, and he is the face of a lost generation. He was only 17 years old when he was killed by cannon fire during the 7 Days Battle. And so he is one of many whose life is lost, and then other lives who are going to be significantly altered because of the Civil War. Now, there's the Second Battle of Bull Run. It takes place 1862, so a little over a year after the first one in Virginia. And this is significant because this is when Thomas Jonathan Jackson earns his nickname Stonewall Jackson. He actually earned it during the first Battle of Bull Run. However, he is so significant because he is a very, very competent leader for the Confederacy and is Robert E. Lee's right-hand man. The North suffers twice the casualties of the South in the Second Battle of Manassas, and it allowed for the South an opportunity to threaten the capital in Washington, D.C. So Stonewall Jackson is significant because of that, and because of his leadership during the Second Battle of Bull Run, the South is victorious. Now, the Battle of Antietam. Now, sometimes with even my own kids or in football, sometimes when somebody's hurt and they're whining during conditioning, I say that there is less crying at the Battle of Antietam, and that's because September 17th, 1862, Maryland was the bloodiest single day in American history. Period. 22,700 casualties in one day. It is the bloodiest single day in American history. So when I say that, it's largely just a poke at, like my kids, crying over, somebody took their toy, and yet, people were sacrificing so much in September 1862 at the Battle of Antietam. So much blood was spilt, and Battle of Antietam, despite the significant superiority in numbers, the Union General McClellan, failed to destroy the rebel army. Now, this is significant because it's going to result in an indecisive, nobody really wins, even though the North had the opportunity to really lay it on the South. Now, McClellan, as you'll see later, the North really had a series of leaders that weren't very significant in advancing or in terms of ending the Civil War. Now, the Battle of Fredericksburg follows up after the Battle of Antietam, 1862. In Virginia, you can see some of the horrific images, or an image of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Now, Robert E. Lee says this, is that it is well that war is so terrible we should grow too fond of it. Now, this is the largest, most one-sided battle of the Civil War. Right after the Battle of Antietam, you had McClellan, who could have tapped out the South, during that significant battle at Antietam in Maryland. Now, Ambrose Burnside is significantly defeated by Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee reportedly takes 900 prisoners during the battle, and the slaughter of Fredericksburg was greeted with a jubilation in the South and consternation in the North, and Lincoln came under heavy criticism and anti-war sentiment that flourished in the Union ranks. So you had Antietam and then Fredericksburg, which this Confederate victory is going to cause Abraham Lincoln after Antietam. And remember, news travels really rather slowly during this time, but it's going to result in Abraham Lincoln issuing something very significant in January 1863. On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln changed the nature of the war by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all people held as slaves within the rebel states are free. Now it's important to remember that Abraham Lincoln does not ever accept the sovereignty of the Confederate States of America. Rather, he views them as states in rebellion. As such, as the executive of those states in rebellion, he has the authority to do this. Changes the nature of the Civil War and the Union war effort. Until then, the North had been trying to preserve the Union and to restore the rebellious states to their pre-war status, making the Union one United States of America. Now, the war became about freedom. As such, it postpones Britain and France's recognition of the Confederacy's independence. This is significant because had Britain and France accepted the sovereignty as an independent nation for the Confederacy, that would have added foreign nations into the Civil War, and that could have had a significant impact on the war, especially say if Britain or France had joined the war on the benefit or on the side of the Confederacy. However, both Britain and France could not morally support a slave-holding republic like the Confederacy against a nation that fought to make men free. Some additional information here about a year and a half into the war. He concludes that democracy and slavery can't coexist. He had already written the Emancipation Proclamation, but couldn't go forward with it. Very similar to Saratoga during the Battle of Saratoga during the American Revolution, unless the Continental Army could prove that they are worth having the French come in to support them. Similarly, if Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation at the wrong time, it could prove to Europe, like Britain and France, that the North was weak and desperate. However, after the Battle of Antietam, where the Confederates are forced to retreat, he felt it was okay to go forward. However, remember that lopsided victory for the Confederacy at Fredericksburg. Lincoln knew he needed to move quickly or lose the momentum. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation also included that should the Southern states not return to the Union, the slaves in those states of rebellion would be free. So, the Emancipation Proclamation does not end slavery. All it ends is this: it allows for slaves in the Southern states to be free. The South doesn't comply, so it shows that that if the war is won by the North, that slavery will cease to exist in the United States. So at this time, slaves begin to free into the North. And it's significant because it changes the nature of the war from a preservation of the Union to that of freedom. It shows that the South is only fighting to keep slavery. Now continuing along with the Civil War battles, we enter May. A lot of fighting does not take place during the winter months. But May 1st through 6th, 1863, in Virginia, the Battle of Chancellorsville is a strategic and moral victory for Robert E. Lee against a superior Northern force. However, as you can see from this image here, Stonewall Jackson is mortally wounded by friendly fire. So, blue on blue situation. So, Stonewall Jackson is wounded. He dies a couple days later. And Robert E. Lee says he has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right, as if referring to his right-hand man. Now, one of the more significant battles of the war took place July 1st through 3rd, 1863, in Pennsylvania. Neither side intended to fight a significant battle at Gettysburg, but both poured troops into the area. The South fails to capitalize on their superiority, and the ferocious combat on the third day would result in a disastrous defeat for the South. Tactically, you end up with Pickett's charge, which is the high point. They have General Pickett tries to attack up Cemetery Ridge, which is at the top of a hill. So tactically, when you hold the high ground, the people down below, just like the Battle of Bull Run during the American Revolution, if you have the high ground, then those trying to attack have to go against gravity up the hill. Now, General Winfield Hancock says that it was one of the strongest battle positions he's ever saw about Cemetery Ridge. And so all of Pickett's men who charge up the hill are either killed, wounded, or captured. Now, the ultimate, the leader taking extreme ownership, General Lee takes ownership and says all of this has been my fault about the carnage of Gettysburg. The Union losses at Gettysburg, about 23,000, the costliest yet for the North. Similarly, 23 to 28,000. Now, this is so significant because Robert E. Lee will never take a strategic offensive against the North again. The Battle of Gettysburg is significant because it weakened the Confederacy, trying to crush Lee's attempt to crush the Army of the Potomac, weakens the Confederacy, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is the furthest north the South would ever attack. Most of the fighting takes place in the Confederacy, which will have an impact on the Confederacy during Reconstruction. However, tactically, this is the furthest north that the Confederates will attack. Now, July 3rd, 1863, when Gettysburg is a victory for the North, also coincides the next day with another strategic victory for the North at Vicksburg. Advancing the plans of the Anaconda Plan to try to swallow the Confederacy. July 4th, along the Mississippi River. Continuing on here, the capture of New Orleans opened the Mississippi to warships. So remember the Battle of New Orleans. Admiral David Farragut, the North controls the port of New Orleans. And Vicksburg was the last significant bastion along the Mississippi, and General Ulysses S. Grant laid siege to it and captures Vicksburg. So July 3rd with the victory at Gettysburg, and July 4th, 1863 with the victory at Vicksburg, very significant for the North. The simultaneous defeat of both Gettysburg and the capturing of Vicksburg makes the South's demise almost inevitable. Now, the war is still going to go on for another 2 years. However, these are two significant victories for the North. And as such, Abraham Lincoln, who had struggled finding competent generals to lead the North, recognized that Grant is his man, and I am his for the rest of the war. Now, the Battle of Fort Wagner in the grand scheme is nowhere near as significant as like Gettysburg or Vicksburg. However, July 18th, 1863 in South Carolina is significant because after the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the first African American units, led by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw's 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, spearheaded the attack at Fort Wagner. This is significant because the entire unit is African American, fighting for the North, fighting against slavery in the South. Now, Colonel Shaw himself is shot in the heart, and the battle will go to the Confederacy. However, this is significant because of the valor of the African American unit, especially during the brutal hand-to-hand combat of Fort Wagner. And there's a great picture there. Now, in a lot of these pictures, you can see the North wearing blue and the Confederates wearing gray. You can see in this image here also you have a combination of a naval war taking place and war on land. Now the Battle of Chickamauga, similarly, not super significant in the grand scheme of things. However, I like to point it out because it took place in Georgia, and spurred by Washington, D.C. to duplicate. So the North is trying to add to Gettysburg and Vicksburg. North's looking to drive the rebels out of Tennessee to further divide the Confederacy, trying to advance the Anaconda Plan. 2 days of fighting, there's 34,000 casualties. And it is a tactical victory for the Confederacy that temporarily shifts the momentum. So while I just said that Gettysburg and Vicksburg are going to have a significant impact on the war, it is paused because of the Confederate victory at Chickamauga. Now the Battle of Chickamauga is also significant because of this man, Nathan Bedford Forrest. He's known as the Wizard of the Saddle. He was a Confederate cavalry leader known for harassing Union forces, played a significant role in the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, during the war, he has 29 horses shot out from under him. He killed at least 30 enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand combat and was wounded 4 different times. And I mention this because while he fought for the Confederacy, this is quite heroic and quite brave. A number of significant cavalry soldiers, warriors, had horses shot out from underneath of him. Unfortunately, though, Nathan Bedford Forrest also comes with the bad rap. He slaughters black forces at the massacre at Fort Pillow after they had surrendered. And after the war, he will be known as the founding member of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, that is going to have significant involvement in a negative way regarding Reconstruction. And General William Tecumseh Sherman says that devil Forrest must be hunted down and killed if it costs 10,000 lives and bankrupts the federal treasury. What that means is Sherman is going to be a significant leader in general for the North, and it shows how significant one man on a horse could be in the Civil War. You also have the little fun play on that Forrest Gump gets his name from Nathan Bedford Forrest in the movie Forrest Gump. Moving on, November 19th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues his very famous Gettysburg Address. Arguably one of the most important speeches in American history. It's only 2 minutes long, and it's delivered at the dedication of a national cemetery in Gettysburg for those who died during the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st through 3rd, 1863. Just not necessarily foreshadowing, but the date is significant. 100 years later, on November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy is assassinated. Abraham Lincoln was not supposed to be the featured speaker. Edward Everett, who was a famous orator, he spoke for 2 hours from memory. Now, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is about 260 words, starting with 7 years ago, he honored the Union dead and reminded the listeners of the purpose of the soldiers' sacrifice: equality, freedom, and national unity. The following day, Everett, who again was the featured speaker, wrote and said, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. So very brief, but very concise and very significant." It doesn't get a lot of attention during his lifetime. It's forgotten and lost to popular memory until the centennial in 1876, so 100 years after the Declaration of Independence, in the light of the war's outcome, a larger context of the country's history. One of the most famous speeches in American history. Back to the Civil War. Into 1864, the Battle of the Wilderness took place again in Virginia, and you have the two titans of the North and the South leading the battles. You have Grant versus Lee. Took place in a tangled woodland area, so hence the Battle of the Wilderness. 3,750 men are killed. Many died during fires, brush fires, by the fighting. So you have cannon fire actually catching the forest on fire, killing men. Now, this is a quote from a Union soldier: "The incessant roar of rifles, men cheering, groaning, yelling, swearing, and praying." Brutal combat. Now, during this battle, the North is able to, Grant is able to defeat Robert E. Lee. Now, continuing with the advancement of the Anaconda Plan, another port is captured by the North, the Battle of Mobile Bay in Mobile, Alabama. Ironclad ships, and Admiral David Farragut advances against a blockade, and there's torpedoes in the water. There's mines in the water to try to prevent the North from capturing capturing Mobile, and it couldn't be used as a supply center. So now the North has captured New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, and very significant. The phrase "damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead" comes from Admiral David Farragut's decision during the war to tie himself to the ship, and very heroic. Now, this one of the kind of sub slogans of the United States Naval Academy, "damn the torpedoes." And so this is propaganda for the United States Navy, trying to help them to enlist, but the bravery exhibited by him during the Battle of Mobile Bay is quite admirable. Continuing on, Battle of Atlanta, 1864, in Georgia. It actually started on the outskirts of Atlanta in July 22nd, and it starts William Tecumseh Sherman's campaign to take the important railroad community of Atlanta. All the thunders of the universe seem to be blazing and roaring over Atlanta. Why? Because William Tecumseh Sherman burns Atlanta to the ground. Now, this sparks Sherman's march to sea. In an attempt to help end the war, William Tecumseh Sherman, a general for the North, takes Atlanta and then begins marching east to sea. But during this time, before he continues on, November 8th, 1864, Abraham Lincoln is reelected as President of the United States of America. He defeats his former General George McClellan. He wins by 400,000 popular votes and 212 to 21 in the Electoral College. However, he chooses Andrew Johnson, a former senator and military governor of Tennessee, as his running mate. The hope here is that you have a Southerner to help rebuild the United States, to help reconstruct it once the war is over. This decision will play very significantly during Reconstruction when the war is over. So remember Andrew Johnson. This time you can also see you've got Nevada, you've got West Virginia splitting off of Virginia, as West Virginia was added to the Union in 1863. Now, continuing on, after the burning of Atlanta, Sherman's march to sea. Very significant, November 15th through December 21st, 1864, in Georgia, significant Union victory. And there's an image of Sherman. He takes 62,000 Union veterans, marches 300 miles in less than a month to the coastal city of Savannah, Georgia. Now, Sherman's march to sea is significant because of the total war inflicted against the South. Makes him a hero in the North. It's a devastating blow to the Confederacy. There are still parts of the Confederacy, the former Confederacy in the South, where to mention Sherman's name is horrible because of the traumatic damage that he causes. He burns everything, crops, cows, all of the Southern infrastructure, resulting in $100 million, not by today's standards, but by 1864 currency values, $100 million in damage. Now, it's a source of total war. However, about a fifth of it was military justified. The rest, so 4/5, just simple waste and destruction. And to justify it, what he did to help end the war, he said that those who brought this war deserve all the curses a people can pour out. So hence why he is viewed as a hero in the North and a villain in the South. Nonetheless, Sherman's march to sea does advance the Anaconda Plan. It essentially gives the North control of the South, with both New Orleans, Mobile Bay, and now the coastal port of Savannah under control. Heading into April 1st, 1865, the Battle of Five Forks in Virginia, the war is coming to an end. You have another significant cavalry leader who's going to play a role after the Civil War in the West, General Phil Sheridan, where Sheridan, Wyoming gets his name. He personally leads a cavalry charge with the help of George Armstrong Custer. So the cavalry cut Lee off from much needed supplies and helped lead the fall of Petersburg and Richmond. So advancing the Anaconda Plan, the North at this point has cut the Confederacy in two. They have controlled the ports, and now they are trying to capture Richmond, the Confederate capital. So the Battle of Five Forks advances the Union cause. You have another person who's going to play a significant role later on with the fighting in the West after the Civil War. There's a picture of George Armstrong Custer. And despite graduating last in his class at West Point, he did unexpectedly well during the Civil War. His fearless aggression earned respect among commanding generals, putting him increasingly in the public eye. His cavalry units played a significant role in the retreat of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's forces. And in gratitude, General Sheridan is going to buy the surrender table at Appomattox for Custer and his wife Libby as a gift, wedding gift. So there's a Custer. The siege of Petersburg had been underway since June 1864 in Virginia. However, it falls on April 2nd, 1865. Trench warfare. You have Robert E. Lee coming in, Grant laying siege to it. Adds to the stalemate because of the trench warfare. Neither could get the upper hand, but eventually Grant severed Robert E. Lee's supply, resulting in them having to surrender Petersburg. So the North is closing in on Richmond. You can see some of the casualties of the trench warfare. So, Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, the last piece of the Anaconda Plan, will fall 24 hours after the siege of Petersburg, leading to the end of the Civil War. Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865. Now it's important to note that Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia is a community, not an actual courthouse. Here's the image of where the war was, where the surrender was signed. Remember, it's a village, not an actual courthouse. Appomattox Courthouse. And now, in speaking about having to go to surrender, he's nothing left for me to do but go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths. Speaking of having to surrender. Now, I mentioned the McLean House here, which is where the surrender takes place. However, it's important to note that after the first Battle of Bull Run, McLean, who was just an owner of a property outside of Virginia, or outside of Washington, D.C., owned the land where the first Battle of Bull Run started. And after the battle, he's like, this is ridiculous, this is crazy, I'm going to leave. I don't want, my land is ruined, and I'm just going to find a new place to live. So he moves to Appomattox Courthouse. So the war literally started at his property and ended on his property. Not literally began, but one of the first significant battle, the first Battle of Bull Run after the attack on Fort Sumter. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Here's a famous painting showing all the players for the North and the South. You can see the surrender table off on the far right. You can see Custer with his blonde hair and curls. General Grant at the table. Phil Sheridan off on the left. The Union blues and the Confederate gray. So the war is over, April 9th, 1865. However, 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln is shot. He dies 1 day later while attending. So the war effectively won. Now the Union needs to just be restored. The leader of the nation, to help get the United States through, is now dead. John Wilkes Booth shoots him on Good Friday. Removed Abraham Lincoln, the best man fitted for restoring the United States. After the war, he had a more moderate plan, and we'll go through this during Reconstruction. So John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer, shoots him while attending the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, Major Henry Rathbone, and his fiancée, Claire Harris, As John Wilkes Booth shoots Lincoln, he shouts "Sic Semper Tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, which is also the state motto for Virginia. He jumps off the balcony, breaks his leg. As he was a former actor himself, but it's part of a larger conspiracy. William Seward is also the Secretary of State. Also has his an attack on his life, and on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln dies. He is assassinated. Now, with the death of Abraham Lincoln, his vice president, Andrew Johnson, is going to be responsible for reconstructing the nation. Civil War is over, and now Reconstruction must begin. And to wrap up the year of 1865, once the war is over, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution is passed, December 6th, ensuring that slavery was banned in the United States. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. So the 13th Amendment is very significant, ending slavery in the United States. Now, just a little recap here of some of the advantages for both the North and the South. So the North had a greater population, a large influx of immigrants, Irish and German. They also implement the conscription. Abraham Lincoln implements the draft, and there are draft riots over this. Nonetheless, they had a larger population. Now, the military leadership under Grant, this is a strength because Ulysses S. Grant sees the big picture, and that is an advantage over the South. Now, you're going to see it here in just a second. It's a weakness, the previous leadership before Grant. Now, Abraham Lincoln is also a significant strength for the North. He never gives up. He's very patient regarding what to do after the South secedes, which is very significant in maintaining the border states, keeping them in the Union. He's very courageous. His cabinet was full of a lot of people who opposed him. William Seward was not happy that Lincoln got the Republican nomination for president in 1860, but yet Lincoln brought him on as the Secretary of State. And then he also sees the bigger picture. It's more than just states' rights, but especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, which is the formal declaration, making the war about slavery and ending slavery. Lincoln had always kind of viewed this as a war against freedom. And then in the North, Abraham Lincoln's cabinet member, Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and the industrialization of the North. There's railroads, factories, industry, gold out west in California. So the actual industrialization that led up to the Civil War is a significant strength for the North, as well as the gold from the state of California, the free state of California. And then Northern diplomacy. So Secretary of State Seward is going out representing the United States, trying to keep other players out of the war, or if they are going to join, that they are going to support the North. And then the Emancipation Proclamation helps to stop any support that England or France might be able to give to the Confederacy. And then the sacrifices of African Americans. So 200,000 are going to volunteer for the North, and then their sacrifices are significant. If they're caught by the South, they would be tortured or executed on the spot. Now, the South had some strengths as well. All the South had to do was defend. So very similarly to the American Revolution, where the Continental Army, all the rebels have to do is just defend it. So it's fought. Most of the war is fought on their turf in the South. A lot of those battles you could see were fought in like Tennessee or Virginia, Georgia. And then the Confederate commanders are superior to the North. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, And then you could say that they had a better cheering section, very similarly to the American Revolution, in that a lot of patriots felt that they were fighting and the war was a just cause. The public support for the Confederacy, feeling that the South, they wanted to keep the institution of slavery, that they were doing what they needed to do to protect that, so they had a larger cheering section, more support in the South than in the North, especially in the North. Though as the war progresses, the war in the North is actually a hindrance, because people start to lose patience, especially during the drafts. So let's get to the weaknesses in the North. Multiple general-in-chiefs. So you can see McClellan, who actually is then going to run for president in 1864 against Lincoln. So they go through three significant leaders before Grant. The duration of the war, like I just mentioned, the longer that this insurgency lasts, the more impatient the public opinion gets, and the more expensive. And so the duration of the war, the longer it goes on, it hurts the North. Hence, to General Sherman's march to try to end it rather quickly. And then the North really underestimates the South's ability to fight, especially early on in the war. Now, I just mentioned that the North had Abraham Lincoln, while the South had Jefferson Davis, who's capable but doesn't see the big picture. He doesn't see the actual Confederacy surviving and working as an independent sovereignty. And then economics and inflation. So inflation hits the North, it doubles. So the cost of goods, $1 is worth $2, or things that would have cost $1 in 1861 now cost $2. But it really hits the South. As you can see, the inflation is ridiculously high over just 4 years. So the economics of starting a new country, a currency, and all of that really take a hindrance to the South. And then the myth of Southern solidarity. So I just mentioned that it was a strength. They had the cheering section, but only half of Virginia supports the Confederacy. So, I mean, you have certain parts of the South that is definitely entrenched in wanting to fight, but then closer up north, you have it split. Similarly to how the Tories and the Patriots during the American Revolution. Now, dealing with dissent during the war, the court order of habeas corpus, requiring authorities to bring a prisoner before the court. So that is suspended, and during the Civil War. So essentially, you can be held without being charged with a crime during the war. So 13,000 Confederate sympathizers are arrested without trial, and declaring Lincoln's suspending of the writ of habeas corpus unconstitutional. So very much like Andrew Jackson's ignoring of the Supreme Court decision regarding the Cherokee. Similarly, Abraham Lincoln ignores Supreme Court Justice Taney's decision about his overstepping of his constitutional or his executive power. Those arrested included Copperheads, the Northern Democrats who advocated for peace with the South, and then Jefferson Davis, who denounces the suspension of the civil liberties, only to do the same in 1862. So both sides suspend the writ of habeas corpus to try to deal with this dissent. Dramatically expands his presidential powers to meet the crisis of wartime, set a precedent in American history. Since then, presidents have cited war or quote-unquote national security as a reason to expand the powers of the executive branch. Now, when you really study Abraham Lincoln's presidency, especially during the Civil War, you have the ability to look at his use of executive power, suspending the writ of habeas corpus, also how he treated the states in rebellion as the executive is rather quite remarkable. Now, The modernization of the Civil War led to a lot of new weapons. You can see ironclad ships, rifles. The accuracy was much improved, like the repeating 30-30 Winchester 30-30. You can shoot 30 shots, or rapid. You can shoot weapons really fast. Well, you don't have to load it up like a musket. Also, you have the Colt 36, 6-shooter. You can shoot 6 shots. Well, very mobile on a horse, for example. You even have some hand grenades and landmines, hot air balloons used for reconnaissance. The Gatling gun, which is a form of machine gun on the far right there. And then the Minay ball, which is a bullet rather than a lead shot, which adds to the carnage. So all of this industrialized weapons are going to add to the casualties and the horror of the American Civil War. And then you also have the founding of the American Red Cross in Clara Barton, who's viewed as the angel of the battlefield. So women take roles in serving their side, oftentimes as nurses on the battlefield. And Clara Barton is viewed as the angel of the battlefield to many men who she comes to aid in their suffering, and then she will later found the American Red Cross. Now, the legacy of the Civil War is really threefold. It preserves the Union. Most likely, if the South had won, there would have been further precedents for splits to just continue to dissolve the Union even more. Second, democracy prevails. An American majority rules. Federalism prevails. States have rights, but the nation comes first. It also gives African Americans more rights with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And then slavery is eliminated by the 13th Amendment. The third, it's also critical in explaining the Industrial Revolution, both before and after the war. So the industrialization that led to the Civil War, with all that technology in steam-powered engines and railroads and communication and making weapons. And then after the Civil War, in building the railroads that go across the continent, and the Gilded Age of all the big businesses in the Second Industrial Revolution. Additionally, 600,000 men die during the Civil War. 300 million fight in it, and equally as many were wounded. So the casualty rates are high. The human sacrifice very significant. Both governments rack up huge debts during war, and Sherman's March to Sea destroys $100 million worth of damage, so it's going to help end the war, but yet it's going to create a very bitter divisiveness in the South, which could be almost foreshadowing trouble to come when the South is rejoins the Union. And then the rapidly expanded role of government in running the nation, especially with Lincoln's use of executive powers and authority to maintain the Union. Those powers are expanded. The economic cost, $3.3 billion in total. $1 billion for the Confederacy, $2.3 billion from the North. Increased the national debt from $65 million in 1860 to $2.7 billion. The Confederacy alone ran up a debt of $1.8 billion in 4 years. Inflation in the North, 182%, and inflation in the South, 7,000%. And then, continuing with the legacy, the cause of the war, conflict over slavery in the territories, the economic difference between the North and the industrial North and the agrarian South, especially over the labor sources of those two different economies, and then the conflict between states' rights and federal control. Now, after the war, we're going to have Reconstruction in the South, an industrial boom, and increased federal authority throughout the United States. And then an immediate cause, immediately with Abraham Lincoln being elected in 1860, the southern states seceding, and then the shots on Fort Sumter in April 1861 caused the Civil War, and then the effect, the abolition of slavery, widening gap between the economies in the North and the South, and then the physical devastation of the South, and reunification of the country. Now, that ends the Civil War presentation. I very much would have rather have gone over this in person. However, enjoy your Thanksgiving break. Your task is to watch this video today and tomorrow, and we will catch up on November 30th back in person. Look forward to that. I miss you guys. Hope to see you all soon. Good luck studying the Civil War. Please read American Yawp, and I look forward to talking with you about the Civil War when we return next week.